grandparents ever tell you that you come from Africa? Did your grandmothers ever tell you came from Africa? Your great-grandmothers, your aunts, did they ever say anything about Africa? And if they did, where in Africa did they say you were from? Who did they say your people were? What did they say the language were? What did they say the customs were? 9 times out of 10, your mamas never said nothing like that. Because if you look into the indigenous people of America, they are the so-called African Americans. The reason why we trick ourselves out of it, because we always coming under some foreign doctrine, something that somebody from somewhere has taught us something, and we take it and we believe it's our life, and that's why we suffer. So the next time somebody say that you came over here locked in a ship, vomiting, pissing, shitting on your fellow brother, think of the psychological warfare that does to a person. Think of the shame that person must feel about himself. Think of the shame that person must feel about his brothers and sisters. I'm Kerry Davis. African Americans ain't African. Peace.
No one who calls themselves an Aboriginal American should do so if you don't claim or believe in Torah or any form of Hebraic study. Allow me to briefly explain. The very term Aborigine is a Hebrew term, which means first to pass over or to pass through. Abar in Hebrew is the root of Eber, which is the root of the word Hebrew itself. It means to pass over. Now, Rishoni or Rishoni means first. Therefore, Aborigine comes from Aborishoni, meaning the first to pass over.
I'm sure that most of us are familiar with Deuteronomy 28 and Leviticus 26. Basically, it is one of the most significant covenants our God made with our ancestors. A promise to our ancestors that if we lived righteously and did His Torah, we would be above all the nations of the earth, in health, spirit, and wealth. What many people do not know is that at one point, our ancestors were above all the nations of the earth. We actually traded goods and knowledge with other people on the Eastern Hemisphere, especially Africa. We also traded cultural knowledge and even scrolls. But a big lie that is propagated today is that North American Aborigines did not have any written language. However, this is a huge myth that is only believed simply because North American Aborigines were the most displaced, enslaved, and culturally stripped people in the Americas. Aboriginal American institutions were burned or destroyed, and people who built them or taught in them were wiped out. Deuteronomy 28 is also a serious warning that if we did not do His Torah, we would be beneath all the nations of the earth, a race of captives, prisoners, prey, and a spoil. And the only way to break this curse would be to turn back to the laws of the Most High.
Psalm 83, a psalm of Asaph.
Do not keep silent, O God. Do not hold your peace, and do not be still, O God. For behold, your enemies make a tumult, and those who hate you have lifted up their head. They have taken crafty counsel against your people, and consulted together against your sheltered ones. They have said, "Come and let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be remembered no more." For they have consulted together with one consent. They form a confederacy against you. The tents of Edom and the Ishmaelites, Moab and the Hagrites, Gebal, Ammon and Amalek, Philistia with the inhabitants of Tyre. Assyria also has joined with them. They have helped the children of Lot. Deal with them as with Midian, as with Sisera, as with Jabin at the brook Kishon, who perished at Endor, who became as refuse on the earth. Make their nobles like Oreb and like Zeeb, yes, all their princes like Zebah and Zalmunna, who said, let us take for ourselves the pastures of God for a possession. Oh my God, make them like the whirling dust, like the chaff before the wind. As the fire burns the woods, and as the flame sets the mountains on fire, so pursue them with your tempest, and frighten them with your storm. Fill their faces with shame, that they may seek your name, O Lord. Let them be confounded and dismayed forever. Yes, let them be put to shame and perish, that they may know that you, whose name alone is the Lord, are the Most High over all the earth.
The history that has been erased in our nation, and in particular with the Native Americans, happened because it didn't fit the story they created, Manifest Destiny. It only works when Indians were savages, and they had to have savages for commerce and government to expand. The ancient artifacts prove otherwise. Why aren't we looking into those? Peter Lilback is the president of Providence Forum and the author of George Washington's Sacred Fire. Okay, Peter. I think a great place for Americans to understand the truth about Americans and Native Americans and African Americans, and all of it. It comes from William Penn. Tell the story.
Great story. Most true Hebrew tribes found in North America lived on the north and east coast, ranging from the south all the way to the northeast. There are some Hebrew tribes in California as well. But these tribes were dispersed either due to natural migration, which was caused by famine and desertification in the land, or because of the Mongol invasions from Siberia, which was prophesied to happen in Ezekiel 38 and 39. A lot of Israelite tribes that were in the southeast, however, were already there because of the Assyrian captivity, which the northern kingdom never left.
That would later become the United States of America, many artifacts have been discovered which suggest that one of the ancient Native American mound builder civilizations, which the U.S. calls Hopewell, are descendants of Hebrew people who migrated to ancient North America during the 500s BC, which is approximately the earliest estimated dates of the Hopewell mound builders in Florida, Tennessee, and Iowa.
It has often been remarked that the people of America come nearer to a parallel with ancient Israel than any other nation upon the globe. Hence, our American Israel is a term frequently used, and common consent allows it apt and proper. End quote.
Remnants of the lost tribes of Israel. They knew God and they rejected him. He put a curse upon them and darkened their faces and turned all men against them. And gentlemen, as Christians, it is our duty to hunt them down and slay them. Read your Bible.
During the early 1700s, New Orleans, Louisiana, became the United States' largest slave market, and by 1808, New Orleans had successfully imported over 100,000 slaves into that one city alone. And even after 1808, more slaves were being illegally imported into New Orleans. However, these slaves did not come from Africa, but from the Caribbean. Most of the slaves taken from the Caribbean and brought to New Orleans came from Haiti or Jamaica, which were both occupied mostly by Taino Indians rather than Africans. When you see New Orleans culture like the Mardi Gras Festival, this is an example of Caribbean Indian culture being utilized in Louisiana, whether the people know it or not. The common scholastic narrative is that Europeans went to Africa and began kidnapping Africans. However, this is a white supremacist lie. Europeans did not just go to Africa and taking Africans off the street. It was a slave trade. Peep the term trade. Many Africans were trading their slaves with the Europeans. These people were already slaves before going into the hands of the European. And many of these slaves were simply descendants of those same slaves that were brought to the continent 100 years previous. Yes, that's right. Most of the slaves that were taken from Africa in general are simply recycled Indians from America that were sent to Africa in the early 1500s. No matter what Indian tribe these people came from, they were brought to a collective area and assimilated into other tribes during the breeding process, and then brought to another collective area and assimilated into those tribes. In other words, our tribes became shuffled up like a deck of cards. When the Most High said he would scatter us, he meant every last word. Due to the very many acts of Indian rebellion, especially the Gullah Wars, which lasted from 1739 to 1859, President Andrew Jackson signed the Indian Removal Act in 1830. For the next 8 years, southeastern Indian tribes fought the soldiers. The struggle of the Seminoles against the United States government to hold on to their land resulted in the Great Seminole War. In January 1837, 10,000 American soldiers were sent to Florida, and the Seminoles were defeated. More than 250 black Seminoles, as well as Seminole prisoners, were loaded onto boats that arrived to New Orleans to await transportation to Indian Territory. Also, the Creek Indians of northern Alabama were being shipped to New Orleans starting in 1837. Numbers 24 and 24. And the ship shall come from the coast of Chittim, and shall afflict Assyria, and shall afflict Eber, and he shall also perish forever. Chittim is a Japhetic father of the Dorian and Mycenaean Greek and Roman empires in Italy, which later spread to the coast of Portugal, Spain, and Britain. This prophecy is saying that the people from Europe would send ships to Assyria and afflict them, and make Eber, also known as the Hebrews, perish forever. In the chapter of Deuteronomy 28, there are key words which hint at our land being in the Americas. For example, Deuteronomy 28 and 36, Hayah shall bring thee and thy king, which thou shalt set over thee, unto a nation which neither thou nor thy fathers have known, and there thou shalt serve other gods, wood and stone. If our home was in the Middle East, we would know who the Europeans are, because ancient Greece was only a boat ride away from modern-day Israel. But the Europeans had to be a people that we never knew, us nor our forefathers. Verse 49, Hayah will bring a nation against thee from far, from the end of the earth, as swift as the eagle flieth, a nation whose tongue thou shalt not understand. In this scripture, the Most High makes it plain and simple that the nation who he sends against us will come from the opposite end of the earth. Like I've already said, modern day Israel is not on the opposite end of the earth from the Greek and Roman Empire. They are actually neighboring locations. Verse 50, a nation of fierce countenance, which shall not regard the person of the old, nor show favor to the young. This scripture shows that the oppressor was very cruel and ruthless when it came to the oppression and destruction of our people. You will see more of that further on in this documentary. In 1452, Pope Nicholas V issued a papal bull known as Doom Diversis. He authorized Alfonso V of Portugal to conquer all Saracens and pagans and non-Christians and deliver them into the hands of perpetual servitude. But this would later be applied to those of the Americas after the Moorish rule of Iberia came to an end. After the end of the Battle of Granada in 1492, hundreds of conquistadors sprang from the coast of Iberia and penetrated the old New World, with Christopher Columbus being the first. Some historians will say that white Europeans could not imperialize the old world until Moorish rule in Spain came to an end, because the Spanish and Arabic Moors were the first to lay claim upon the Americas from Europe, hence the numerous Arabic merchants all throughout the Atlantic during that time. It is also a well-known fact that Columbus brought a Hebrew interpreter along with him by the name of Luis de Torres, because Columbus was expecting to find Israelites in the land. Not only that, but Columbus also stated that he was trying to capture the holy city of Zion in the Indies. Christopher Columbus and the Participation of the Jews by Meyer Kirsling. In an excerpt of this book we read, of sources, statements, opinions, and prophecies on the subject of the recovery of God's holy city in Mount Zion, and on the discovery and evangelization of the islands of the Indies and all the other peoples and nations, to Ferdinand and Isabella Ecteria, our Spanish rulers, only going to the Caribbean and the coast of Central America, never to find this city of Zion that he was longing for. However, he found islands full of melanated Taino, Arak, and Carib Indians, who he called Los Indios, or the people of God. But there, he and his men raped the woman and took nearly 1,000 people as captives and brought them to Spain and Portugal. And they were traded along the coast of the Mediterranean and North Africa. Some were even taken as far as the Silk Road to Asia Minor. In 1493, Pope Alexander signed Intercateria, which gave Spain and Portugal authority to every area west and south of the Cape Verde Islands. In 1494, these lands of Central and South America were officially divided into conquest borders.
You can ask an Indian about that. Ask an Indian about if you can find one. You got to locate an Indian first. We've made them just a little difficult to find. Or if you need current data, select the black family at random. Ask them how generous America has been.
1. Hernando de Soto's men would have already enslaved and captured hundreds of Florida Indians, selling them off the coast into Cuba and mainland Mexico to be converted into Catholicism. The Indians who were sent to the islands would serve hard labor for a period of time to quote-unquote break them of their primitive savage Indian nature, and later bring them to mainland Mexico on ships to be converted to Christianity. Not only was the first waterway slave trading going on between Florida, the Caribbean, and Mexico, but it was also going on between New England and Europe, as well as North Africa. In the book Africans and Native Americans by Jack D. Forbes, it states, quote, slaves from Terra Nova, Canada, showed up in the slave markets of Seville and Valencia very soon after 1500. For example, in Valencia, during the period of 1516, we find in 1503, Miguel, Mani, in 1505, Juan and Pedro, in 1507, Antonio and Juan Amarico, in 1515, Ali, now Melchor, in 1516, Catalina. They were all classified as Negroes. End quote. At least 3,000 Americans, so-called Indians, are now known to have been shipped from Europe between 1493 and 1501, with the likely total being possibly double that. Most were sent to the Seville area, where they seem to show up in slave markets as Negroes. These Indians who were sold into slavery and shipped across the sea to Europe, they were classified as Negroes. You can tell the Moors had a lot to do with the capturing of these Indians as well, due to the fact that one of the Indians was renamed Ali, which was an Arabic name. And like I've mentioned before, Arabic Moors had control over the Atlantic before the Europeans did. Time, the United States colonies began to set up plantations. Every plantation that was built on Indian ground. The cotton, beans, corn, and rice that the natives of the land were already growing were now forced to be grown for Europeans for profit. This same form of slavery spread south to Georgia, Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, and Texas. However, most of the slaves of Texas, especially Galveston, which was the largest slave port in Texas, were specifically taken from Cuba and other Caribbean islands. The slaves all throughout the South were simply Indians robbed of their history, mentally, physically, and sexually abused, and forced into servitude by the Europeans on their own land, growing their own food for Europeans for their profit.
Columbus. But there's at least one extremely large piece of evidence carved right into the landscape near Fayetteville, Ohio, that can't be denied as solid evidence of Hebrew people in ancient North America. And you can see it right on Google Earth. But before we get into that, just a brief introduction. The Hopewell Mound Builders built hundreds of thousands of structures out of various types of earth materials. These structures included burial mounds, animal effigy mounds, forts, temples, and advanced geometric structures with lunar and solar alignments. Many of these structures have been leveled down and destroyed as the United States expanded west and built itself right over them, but some still exist today. Early U.S. settlers would create detailed survey drawings of some of these structures. There are a few good books which were published by the Smithsonian in the mid-1800s that show detailed survey drawings from the Ohio and New York areas. They're called Ancient Monuments of the Mississippi Valley, Aboriginal Monuments of New York, and Antiquities of New York. But there was a one-of-a-kind mound builder structure that was unlike all the rest, at least as far as I know. In 1823, Major Isaac Roberdeau of the United States Army Corps of Engineers created this survey drawing of a massive earth structure just southwest of present-day Fayetteville, Ohio. Notice the Hebrew oil lamp. Notice the 9-candle menorah. And notice other ancient and sacred symbols such as the compass and the square. Another drawing of this structure is included in one of the Smithsonian books I mentioned earlier, Ancient Monuments of the Mississippi Valley. And you can see it right on Google Earth. Here's a satellite image of the area where the structure was said to have been located. It's just southwest of Fayetteville, Ohio, where the 131 and the 50 intersect, and it's all just farmlands and trees. Do you see the spot they missed? There it is, right there. The Hebrew letter Shin, or Sin. And it's okay if you didn't see it. I didn't see it either until someone pointed it out to me a few months ago. Anyway, so there you have it. 5 ancient sacred Hebrew symbols right there at a Hopewell Mound Builder site in Ohio, with one of the symbols still there carved into the landscape, staring us all in the face and telling us, yes, Hebrew people were here in ancient North America. So this ancient metal record that the Book of Mormon came from was originally written in a reformed Egyptian language. Some of the characters on the record are similar to some of the characters in the written language of the Algonquin Micmac Native Americans, whose written language is also a form of Egyptian called Hieratic Egyptian. And they had this language before the European settlers arrived. So how did the Micmacs have Hieratic Egyptian as their language? My opinion is that the language was handed down through the generations from the ancient Hebrews who came to North America 2,600 years ago, who knew how to speak, read, and write both the Hebrew and Egyptian languages. The Book of Mormon tells about this ancient Hebrew people and how some of them also believed in Jesus Christ as the Son of God.
The transatlantic slave lie. Are we to believe that these people stayed chained up like this for months, pissing and shitting on each other, throwing up, defecating and eating in those same conditions? Look how close they are. If you look at the bottom of the feet, they look like they may already be dead. But this is how things are romanticized to the African American. Look at the floor. How could a ship survive the Atlantic Ocean? How could these men, look at these brothers at the bottom, look how they're packed in there like sardines. How could these brothers survive the waves? And as you'll see in a minute, the waves were treacherous. Are we supposed to believe this? What did these people eat? What did they drink? And how did they drink and eat laying down? What were they fed from? What were they eating out of? Did they have bottled water back in those days? How is this possible? How would these guys survive if their heads are hitting these boards in those waves of the Atlantic Ocean? Now this image is interesting. Check these brothers and sisters out. They don't look like they going to be no slaves. They look like they going to a party. Look how the kids are chilling. Look how this brother's daydreaming somewhere like he can't get to where he can't wait to get to where he's going. Look how the sisters are just laid back like they in a park somewhere, legs spread open. They daydreaming. What is this? And how would these people survive those conditions coming across the Atlantic? This is what I mean by surviving those conditions. Look at the waves that we are seeing in the middle of the ocean. This is a cargo ship in the middle of the ocean, but this is a storm it's caught. Are we to believe that our ancestors, who we just saw those pictures, chilling, laying back in the boat, are we supposed to believe they survived that? What about those brothers who were put at the bottom of those ships? They're bouncing around on waves like this, surviving? These are the stories that the African American are given, and these are the stories that the African American are supposed to believe. Now we can see why the African American is in the condition that they are in. Question 2. Is it likely that one group of people would drag another group of people from halfway around the world and then put those refugees on their money? In John Jones's masterpiece, The Confederate Currency, The Color of Money, he shows image upon image of people who look like African Americans in their economies doing what they do in their economies. This picture right here on the front, a lot of people don't understand that black indigenous females are the ones who cultivated cotton in America. This is a sister's industry. But since we claim that we Africans, since we claim that we Hebrews, since we claim that we Moors, since we claim that we Muslims, how can we claim what's rightfully ours that our ancestors left for us? We just throw it in the trash. So is it possible, or is it logical that white people would drag Africans over here and then put them on the money? Well, why don't you ask the question yourself? This is the state of Alabama, $100 bill. Sisters right here. If you go down in the Creek country, you'll see that many of the sisters look like that. I see sisters like that down there in Tuskegee at the area every day. Brothers, why would they put these people on the money? Especially Alabama, as racist a state as Alabama is, why would they do that? These are the questions you have to ask yourself. Don't ask nobody else, because they may not know. If you start asking yourself the questions, believe me, you have enough spirit and enough heart to come back with a question that you ask. So, this is the economy that was thriving when the European got here. These people don't look homeless. These people don't look destitute. These people look nice. This is who you were before you ran into Jesus Christ. So are we to believe that they drugged these people over here and put them on the money? No, these are the indigenous people who are already here. Again, this is the state of Virginia. These are the farmers, probably tobacco farmers. Why are they on the Confederate dollars back in those days? Does that seem logical? To bring people over, then put them on the money? Or were the people that were already here had an economy and the European tried to fuse the two economies together and in the end wind up doing what they always do, tricking you out of your inheritance? That's what it seems. That's what seems to have happened. If you like to talk about us, we can be reached at info@AfricanAmericans.org. We can come to the Facebook page, African Americans Ain't Africans, the chat room, because these are the things our children cannot grow up twisted like we were. Because what we wound up doing, especially with the civil rights movement and all of these things that we get ourselves into, we wind up giving our inheritance away to other people. Question number 3. A lot of people ask, so what are you saying? The transatlantic slave trade didn't happen? Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. Well, if that didn't happen, how did they get over here? How did who get over here? How did the Africans get over here? No Africans came. And if they did come, they came with their masters. See, one of the stories that we're given the stories about the Moors of Spain, how these black men went up to Spain and took over Spain for so many hundreds of years. Well, those were the cats that came over, if they did come over, but they didn't come over here as slaves. And another thing, what we have to ask, whenever we're trying to figure out something, we always have to look at maps to help us figure it out, because somebody can tell you that Cuba is in Africa, and if you don't know, if you never looked at a map, you would think Cuba is in Africa. So this is the story that they give us. This is the narrative that they give us, that Portugal and Spain, the Pope told Portugal and Spain to divide up the world. These people built ships in Portugal and Spain. By the way, when people are telling you this story, ask them, where did they build the ships? Where did they get the resources to build the ships? These are questions you have to ask, because people will tell you anything. Portugal and Spain built ships, came all the way down the coast. Now this is a trip right here. Just this horn of Africa coming down here, that's a trip. Then they go into the interior, pack up their boats, hit the equator, and head across to America. This is what the African American believes is the story of his life. With the story of roots and other shenanigans that they were given, the African American thinks this is the origin of his beginning. The people on the ships, that's where it started. And then those people on those ships crossed this in those waves to America. That ain't how it happened. If you look at maps, this is why it's important to look at maps. You have to look at feasibility. The Atlantic Ocean is too rough for boats in that time to come over safely. Also, hurricane season. They mean that they take off 6 months out of a year, 5 months out of the year to stop their operation for hurricane season? I don't think so. So what happened? When we look at it from a realistically point of view, you'd have to understand that up here in the North Atlantic, here's England. Here's Scotland up here. Here's France. You ever wonder how France, Canada is named after France? Everything in Quebec, Montreal, that's French, because they didn't come across the Atlantic, they came across the Northern Atlantic. And we'll give you a better look here in a minute. All they did was come up here, and when you get up here near Iceland, and when you get up here in the Norwegian Sea, it's nothing but icebergs up here. It's cold. The waters aren't as rough up here as they are in the middle of the Atlantic, because as we'll see in a minute, they have icebergs. Here's another picture. Here's England. Here's England. Here's Scotland right here. Here's Iceland. So doesn't it make more sense that they would come across here? Because there's nothing but ice up here. You heard of the Titanic. You heard that it struck an iceberg. Well, that's what you have up in the North Atlantic Ocean. They just skipped across here. Iceberg. Here's Iceland. Here's Greenland. When you get off Greenland, you right here in Nova Scotia. New Scotland. This is the way they came across. How do you know they came across? Because what I get most of the time is, how did you figure this out? Because I have a brain that works. We all do. We just used to taking directives like dogs, because the African American is trained much like animals. They really don't do too much thinking. They're just told what to do. That's why this is confusing to a lot of people. So again, the icebergs. This is what the seas look like up there in the North Atlantic. So these seas aren't going to be rough because the massicity of the iceberg is going to keep the waters calm. That way you can take your boat, your raft, or whatever you're using to get across, you use that to get across. That's the way they got to America. But still, there'll be other people saying, I don't believe it. No, you lying. You know how we do. So you just have to ask common sense questions. How do you know that's the way they came? Who told you that? Well, I figured it out myself. How did you figure it out? Because New England. The New England part of the United States. Why is it called New England? Because they're trying to fancy it after Old England. And when you get to New England, what comes after New England? You got Nova Scotia, New Scotland. You got Newfoundland. Doesn't that sound like a place that somebody who was coming just found something new and they decided to name this place Newfoundland? We found some new land. New Hampshire, Newport, New Bedford, New York, New Jersey, New Amsterdam, Nova Scotia. They're naming everything new because they're coming from the old world. Is that reasonable that I should look at it like that? You would name, if I'm from Compton and I'm moving down to Mississippi somewhere, I'm going to call my little spot New Compton. Simple. How this flies over our head and we call ourselves having an education is beyond me. So then what happened was when they got here, they started going down the eastern seaboard and they started naming places like after their kings and stuff. Virginia, guess she was the queen or something back there. Lynchburg. They started naming Winston-Salem, Columbia. They started naming them. Now they're not naming them the places back at home. They're naming them after people. They're naming them after monuments back home. And then they come over here and start putting their names and faces all over everything. That's how they're stepped down into the America. Then they went down to Georgia, to the Caribbean, back up. But everything, they didn't come across the Atlantic. They just came and hugged the coast and went down. If you think about it, question yourself. Put all scenarios in your mind, question yourself, and see what you come up with. Contact us if you have any new findings that you think.
Is this you discussing Indian blood? We're going to judge people by whether they have Indian blood, whether they're qualified to run a gaming casino or not?
That probably is me, absolutely. Because I'll tell you what, if you look at some of the reservations that you've approved, you, sir, in your great wisdom have approved, I will tell you right now, they don't look like Indians to me. And they don't look like the Indians. Now, maybe we say politically correct or not politically correct. They don't look like Indians to me, and they don't look like Indians to Indians. And a lot of people are laughing at it, and you're telling how tough it is, how rough it is to get approved. Well, you go up to Connecticut, and you look. Now, they don't look like Indians to me, sir.
Thank God that's not the test of whether or not people have rights in this country or not, whether or not they pass your look test.
Depends whether, yeah, depends whether or not you're approving it, sir.
No, it's not a question whether I'm approving it. It's not a question whether I'm approving it. Mr. Trump, you know in the history of this country where we've heard this discussion before, they don't look Jewish to me.
Oh, really?
They don't look Indian to me. They don't look Italian to me.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a test for whether people could go into business or not go into business, whether they could get a bank loan. You're too black, you're not black enough.
ببني إسرائيل في التاريخ القديم من ناحية العرق والجنس يفترض أن بني إسرائيل في التاريخ القديم كانت لهم مواصفات جسمانية كطول الجسد وكعرض الجسد وشكل الرأس ولون البشرة ولون الشعر ولون العينين هذه المواصفات التي يفترض أن الأبناء يولدوا دائما يتوارثون. اليهود الآن منهم الزنجي، ومنهم صاحب الشعر الأصفر، ومنهم صاحب العيون الزرقاء، يعني تقريبا يتنوعوا ما بين أجناس البشر المختلفة. وبالتالي الحديث عن أن هؤلاء في العصر الحديث لهم علاقة ببني إسرائيل في التاريخ القديم هذا ليس صحيح. الرابط الوحيد بين هؤلاء وبين بني إسرائيل في التاريخ القديم بعد السبي البابلي أو قبل ذلك بالنسبة للذين كانوا يرتكبون المشاكل أو يسببون الأزمات التاريخية، الرابط هو الديانة وليس الرابط العرقي.
لماذا نجد الدموية لديهم والعنصرية؟
يبدو سبحان الله يبدو أنه شيء فطري فيهم. لأستاذنا الدكتور رشاد الشامي كتاب صدر عن سلسلة عالم معرفة اسمه الشخصية اليهودية والروح العدوانية. هذا الكتاب يؤكد الحقيقة على أن الروح العدوانية موجودة بعمق داخل هذه الشخصية، ولا يعني أبتعد كثيرا إذا قلت أن القرآن قبل ذلك أكد على هذا الأمر حينما تحدث عن قادم الفتن وإشعال الحروب ما بين الناس. فالأمر يبدو أنه يتعلق بالطبيعة، يعني يحتاج